Commander Elias Thorne stood with his back to the burning wreck of a Hegemony dreadnought, his eyes impossibly calm as blood trickled down his weathered face. He did not raise his rifle. He simply watched the Auric Empress with a gaze that suggested he had already seen the end of the world and found it unremarkable. How many years had we spent waiting for a man who looked like this? If you want to see how one soldier's scars rewritten the fate of 2 galaxies, stay with us as this chronicle unfolds. Now, the archives reveal the path to that fire. 11 years earlier, the first stars had begun to burn, ignited by a Hegemony fleet that didn't believe humans could bleed enough to matter. On the neutral station of Zenith Concord, that arrogance had finally curdled into a stalemate. Empress Kaelin sat at the head of the obsidian council table, her silver skin shimmering under the artificial lights like moonlight on a knife's edge. Her advisors, all high-ranking Auric generals, whispered of renewed offensives, their voices a low thrum of predatory intent. They viewed the United Sol Alliance as a stubborn infection, a species that used primitive ballistics and lacked the psychic grace of the Hegemony. Yet, the war had ground to a halt. The weak species had developed a habit of surviving. High Consul Vance, the Sol representative, leaned forward. His suit was pressed, but his hand shook almost imperceptibly. He proposed the unthinkable, a political marriage, a binding blood oath to fuse the 2 lineages and force a peace that neither side could break without destroying themselves. Kaelin's response was a cold, rhythmic tapping of her fingernails against the table. She agreed to the meeting, but she demanded to vet the candidate personally. She expected a prince or a polished diplomat. Instead, the Alliance sent a battered ship called the Patient Mile. The vessel was a relic of the early war, its hull scorched and pitted. When the airlock hissed open, Commander Elias Thorne stepped onto the station. He wore no medals. No golden braid adorned his shoulders. He carried only a small, worn leather journal, the edges frayed and the spine held together by translucent tape. During the formal diplomatic dinner, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of ozone and unspoken threats. General Malachor, a veteran of the Siege of Orion, began a mocking toast listing the Hegemony's technological triumphs. He spoke in the rapid, melodic trills of the Auric tongue, assuming the human would rely on a translator. He responded in perfect ancient Auric, his accent flawless but heavy with the weight of someone who had learned the language from the poets rather than the military manuals. He didn't speak of conquest. He looked Malachor in the eye and recounted the general's own history, describing the bravery of the Auric rear guard at the Battle of the 3 Moons. He spoke with respect, not malice. The general fell silent. The Empress watched Thorne's hands rough, calloused and steady. He was the most dangerous man in the room because he was the only one who refused to hate. Peace is often built on the things we choose to remember rather than the things we choose to destroy. What do you think is the hardest thing for a soldier to forgive? We're continuing the record. Kaelin requested the classified records of Thorne's service. She expected to see a list of kills. Instead, the data crystals showed a decade of advocacy for prisoner exchanges and medical ceasefires. Gemini said. The data crystals flickered, casting a pale blue light over Kaelin's features as she sat alone in her sanctum. She had expected to find the tactical genius of a butcher. Instead, she found a man who had spent the last 3 years of the war being reprimanded by his own command for allowing Auric life pods to escape. He had lost everything: his home on the Mars colony, his family. Yet, in the psychic imprint of his records, there was no black pit of vengeance. There was only a quiet, silver endurance. The morning of the wedding procession was meant to be the dawn of a new era. The air in the great plaza of Zenith was thick with the scent of ceremonial incense and the hum of 1,000 hovering cameras. Kaelin walked beside Thorne, her ceremonial robes heavy with plates of gold. Thorne looked uncomfortable in the high-collared dress uniform of the Alliance, yet he walked with a soldier's steady rhythm. Then the air screamed, Archduke Valerius, A man who saw peace as a surrender of his own relevance had hidden his assassins among the statues of the plaza. They moved like liquid shadow, wielding energy blades that hummed with a lethal, high-frequency whine. The first strike was aimed at Kaylin's throat. She didn't have time to raise her personal shield, but she didn't have to. Thorn moved with a speed that defied his age and his injuries. He didn't pull a weapon. He threw his own body into the path of the blade. The white-hot edge of the energy sword bit deep into his shoulder, searing through cloth and muscle. Blood, dark and human, splattered across Kaylin's silver skin. Thorn didn't fall. He grunted, caught the assassin's wrist, and used a leverage move that sent the attacker crashing into a marble pillar. Despite the smoking wound in his chest, he stood as a living wall between the Empress and the remaining 5 shadows. He fought with a desperate, grounded ferocity, taking 2 more shallow cuts to the ribs to ensure not a single blade reached the woman behind him. When the station security finally swarmed the plaza, Thorn was the only one left standing among the unconscious assassins. He swayed, his face ashen, yet his eyes remained locked on Kaylin. "Are you?" he coughed, a red stain blooming on his collar. "Are you intact?" Kaylin didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, ignoring the frantic calls of her guards, and pressed her hand against his bleeding shoulder. She looked at the cameras, at the trillions of beings watching from across the stars. She did not wipe the human blood from her armor. "Valerius is a ghost," she declared, her voice carried by the station's broadcast system. "He is stripped of name and rank. This man is not my captive. He is the heartbeat of the hegemony." The wedding went forward that evening. It was not a celebratory gala, but a quiet, somber ritual. In the Auric culture, a psychic binding the Kol Rabra allows 2 souls to share a single moment of absolute truth. It is a biological exchange of neural pathways, a bridge built of shared synaptic fire. As the priests initiated the link, Kaylin prepared herself for the pain she knew resided within him. But as their minds touched, the sensation wasn't just his pain. It was a flood of resilience that swept through the entire Auric species through the Empress's conduit. They felt the weight of every name he had ever lost, but they also felt the hope that kept him from pulling the trigger when the war was at its worst. For the first time in history, the hegemony understood what it meant to be human. It wasn't about the strength to destroy, it was the strength to remain whole while being broken. Peace didn't come with a flourish of trumpets. It came with the silence of 2 species, finally recognizing their own reflection in the eyes of the other. The night. Weeks later, he sat on a balcony overlooking the stars he had once helped set on fire. He held the small leather journal in his lap. He opened it to the very last page, where thousands of names were written in cramped, meticulous script. Friends, enemies, the fallen. He picked up a pen and, with a hand that still trembled slightly, drew a single, clean line beneath the final name. He closed the book. It was finally full. Which name would you want remembered if the stars themselves forgot? If you want to see more chronicles of the human spirit, join us tomorrow for another archive. Until then, keep the fire burning.